Mornings with Zerlina, now on SiriusXM Progress.
Welcome back to Mornings with Zerlina. Dr. Michael Mann is director of the Penn Center for Science, Sustainability, and the Media at the University of Pennsylvania. He's also the author of Our Fragile Moment, How Lessons from Earth's Past Can Help Us Survive the Climate Crisis. Good morning, Professor. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Zerlina. It's great to be with you.
So we've all been watching with concern what's happening in Los Angeles, but sort of let's lay the foundation and help everyone at home understand how something like this could happen, because as the governor said, this may be the worst natural disaster in American history. What are some of the things that contributed to what we are watching unfold in Los Angeles?
Yeah, thanks. And this is just the latest example, right? The floods in North Carolina and the southeastern U.S. from Hurricane Helene, devastating, unprecedented flooding. And now we have these unprecedented wildfires in Southern California. And they are symptomatic of the exacerbating effects of human-caused climate change from the burning of fossil fuels. It's that basic. That's the main underlying factor that is driving more widespread, more damaging wildfires in the Western U.S. And that, that relationship has been established firmly in the scientific community. Now, lately, you've been hearing all sorts of claims that this is due to arson or it's due to bad forest management. Of course, most of these wildfires aren't even in forest regions. They're actually in heavily occupied residential areas, or you'll hear that it's the policies of the woke policies of the governor. All of that is designed to distract you from the fact that the main underlying factor is more fuel for these fires because of the drier, hotter conditions, Santa Ana winds that now come within the fire season, within the dry season, because the dry season has expanded now in California. It's not just the summer and early fall, it's well into the winter. And the Santa Ana winds tend to happen in sort of the winter and spring months. And so now you see that because of the broader dry season there, it's intersecting with these Santa Ana conditions, these extremely hot, high winds, and that synergy, which is fostered by human-caused warming, is what produced this disaster.
This is a really helpful explanation, because I think that there is a lot of, distraction in terms of people blaming DEI, people saying it's arson, there's conspiracy theories running rampant online, and there's a lot of misinformation right now.
Yep.
And I've been talking a lot on the show about how obviously in the middle of the crisis, you just want to do everything you can to help people. But I also think that we have to create the space for the conversation about how we got here. Like, what did we need to do, Professor, that we didn't do to avoid climate catastrophe like we're seeing in Los Angeles?
Yeah, thanks. So well put. And what we didn't do, and what we're still not doing, because we have an incoming administration, the Trump administration and congressional Republicans are going to work to dismantle the modest progress that we actually made on climate policy here in the United States over the past few years. So at a time when we need to be rapidly decarbonizing our societal infrastructure, we need to be ramping down carbon emissions by 50% this decade and bring them down to zero by the middle of the century to avert a truly catastrophic more than 3-degree Fahrenheit warming of the planet, where all of this gets that much worse. To do that, we need to be moving rapidly away from fossil fuels towards clean energy. And of course, the incoming Trump administration wants to essentially, dissolve the progress that we've made on climate policy and double down in an agenda of fossil fuel extraction and burning that will just send us further down this dangerous slope that we're on. Now, let me make one other point here. Sure, there are things that we need to do to help people on the ground. There are policies that can help us, establish greater resilience in the face of this increasing threat. But there is no amount of adaptive capacity that will allow us to deal with these sorts of crises if we continue to make them worse by warming the planet even more.
I mean, what I gather from what you're saying is that obviously there are short-term things that, local governments and policymakers can do to prevent the damage once the fire is already starting. But what we actually need to do is prevent the conditions that are leading to the fires growing and expanding out of control, right? So the reason why this fire is so bad, these fires are so bad, is because of what you explain is the combination of these various factors.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there are a lot of people out there right now second guessing sort of land use policies and water use policies. Actually, there was more than enough water. The reservoirs were nearly full. And so this claim that that the reservoirs have been depleted by the Los Angeles politicians, that's not true.
I keep seeing this picture,
yeah.
though. What is that picture of?
Oh, I don't even know the picture you're talking about. I do know that I think that the main reservoir is about 80% full or something like that. Was about 80% full, and you're right next to the ocean. There isn't a shortage of water. There was a shortage of infrastructure and equipment and aircraft to deal with essentially an unprecedented crisis, and that's what we're talking about. It's similar to what I saw down in Australia when I was there for sabbatical during the so-called Black Summer of early 2020, when they were experiencing, when disastrous wildfires were blanketing the continent of Australia. And what you would hear from firefighters is they just didn't know how to deal with the fires they were seeing. They were qualitatively different. They burn hotter, they spread faster. And so, yeah, we can try to provide as much infrastructure, and we're getting some help right now actually from Canada and Mexico. They're helping bring in firefighting aircraft and equipment, but we can sort of change zoning policies to try to avoid, especially building in wildfire prone regions. There are ways to sort of try to tweak the sort of controlled burn policies that we have. There are things that we can do to fiddle at the edges, but it's like deck chairs on the Titanic. The Titanic, of course, the iceberg that we're trying to avoid is climate disaster, and that's really what's amplifying these disasters.
How does what's happening in Los Angeles compare to Australia?
Very similar in so many ways. In fact, it's a bit of a shell shock for me, frankly, because I lived through that. I was down there to do research on climate and arrived to watch the climate disaster play out in real time in the form of these fires. And what was going on there at the time, the Murdoch media was blanketing the airwaves and the newspapers with climate change disinformation, the same sort of claims we're seeing from the right-wing press and the right-wing media here in the US right now, claims that it's arson or it's backburning policies, and trying to deflect attention away from the gorilla in the room that they don't want to acknowledge, right? Because they are essentially advocates for the fossil fuel industry. And what we see playing out, what we saw playing out in Australia, what we see playing out here is an indictment of the fossil fuel industry that the current Republican Party, of course, is very closely allied with. And that's what we're dealing with here. So they're trying to deflect as much attention as they can, trying to blame Democrats and Gavin Newsom, when in fact it's Republican policies and Trump's policies coming in that are amplifying these disasters that we're dealing with.
So, on the flip side of that propaganda, how can the rest of the media do a better job in not amplifying some of the misinformation and spreading things that are incorrect, and focusing on the facts and the real reason why this is happening?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Zerlina, because it allows me to wear one of my other two hats. I direct a Center for Science Sustainability in the Media here at Penn, which is part of the Annenberg School for Communication. And there's a lot of research that's gone into this sort of messaging. How do we defeat disinformation and misinformation, especially when it's very sticky, right? These facts, these supposed facts that are being put out there are very easy to sort of retain because they're overly simplistic messages. Right. Oh, it's arson. Oh, it's bad forest management policies. And the truth is we've been spending, I don't know, 10 minutes already trying to sort of really unpack the reality is more complicated, but climate is a key underlying factor. And so what we have to do, we have to rebut the myths. And I think a number of media outlets have been doing a good job. Obviously, you hear, I've been doing interviews on MSNBC, CNN, Weather Channel, trying to get the correct information out there. First, rebutting the myths, but then replacing those myths. You have to put something in their place. When you displace the myth, you've got to find a simple, pithy explanation that's equally sticky so that people retain that. And that's what we have to do.
So what is the replacement for the misinformation that's being spread that this is Karen Bass's fault because of DEI?
It's climate change, stupid. I mean,
yeah.
It's that simple. The key underlying factor, and you can go to AAAS, American Association for the Advancement of Science. They've got a webpage, Sciline, where they provide, a simple to understand assessment of the actual peer-reviewed science. And if you go to Sciline, AAAS Sciline, what they'll tell you is that more than half of the increase in the extent of wildfires in the Western US over the past half century is driven by climate change. It's that simple. That's the primary underlying factor.
It's climate change stupid. But I like that more than it's the economy stupid, because I actually never really liked it's the economy stupid, but I like the climate change one. Let's talk about what we could expect to see this week. So they're predicting that the Santa Ana winds are going to pick back up, which is really unfortunate because that means that, in particular, the Palisades fire, which is just like huge and not under control at all, can potentially get worse. What are you looking at in terms of it? There are 3 active fires last I checked this morning before coming on air, and the winds and that combination is going to be maybe not the best recipe. So what are you looking for this week?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all extremely apprehensive. I mean, the disaster that's already played out, we've seen more than 12,000 homes and buildings lost, by some estimates, more than $50 billion in damage. And it will probably get worse because, as you say, there's a forecast that we're going to see a return of these Santa Ana winds interacting with these bone dry conditions because there hasn't been any rainfall in that region. We're now into the new year, or well into the rainy season, and there hasn't been any rain. And so all of the conditions are there. Unfortunately, we need to be as prepared as possible. Obviously, the assistance that we're getting from the Biden administration, the outgoing Biden administration that actually, supports more funding for this sort of stuff. The incoming administration, the Trump administration, and Republicans have been trying to downsize funding. Another irony here, but we're seeing a lot of resources right now coming in from the federal government and some of our neighbors, Canada and Mexico, and hopefully we're going to be as prepared as possible. But there's nothing you can do. In the end, nature wins these battles, and we are amplifying the devastating impact of how we are warming the planet.
How do the United States policies as it relates to combating the climate crisis, compare to other parts of the world? That's one of the questions I always am curious about, because I feel like we may not be doing what we're supposed to be doing, but obviously climate change is a global problem, and other countries, they might be doing some of the right things.
Yeah, well, I have some experience. Like I said, I was down in Australia when they were going through this. And there's a famous poem. I forget the name of the author. I think it's Sunburnt Nation. But it's about Australia is this extremely overall hot and dry continent that is especially prone to wildfires, and it's always been that way. And the First Nations people of Australia understood that and had practices to try to mitigate that land, clearing, sort of land clearing, and Australia has a long history of perhaps as long a history as any nation of dealing with and being prepared for these bushfires, these wildfires. And even they, like I said, their firefighters were saying that they just didn't know how to contend with this new type of wildfire that they're seeing, that's burning hotter, it's spreading faster. It's sort of outside of their range of experience, and I fear that that's what we're seeing here. So we're doing the right things. We're bringing the right resources to bear in trying to confront these wildfires. And there is an ongoing conversation about what practices, types of land clearing and zoning policies can best mitigate the sort of the long-term problem. But in the end, nature wins. And we are not going to win this battle if we continue to amplify these wildfires by warming and drying out. The Western US, Australia, and other, fire-prone regions of the world. And even here, I live in Philadelphia. 2 summers ago, we had the worst air quality in the world because of the Canadian wildfire smoke. And so no place is immune from these impacts now.
I remember when that was happening. I was in Washington, D.C. at that time, and I was
Yeah.
like, I never thought I would see the day
Yeah.
where I have to wear a mask outside because of
Yep.
wildfires all the way up in Canada. I mean,
Yep.
that was I think obviously we talk about climate change and the climate crisis almost in a theoretical sense
Yeah.
sometimes. Or we'll watch a hurricane and we'll be like, okay, that's related to climate change. But I think it hit home for a lot of people that wildfires in another country, literally,
Yeah.
could impact your air quality, and you would have to change your behavior in that way. I mean, I think the
That's right.
climate crisis hitting home in that way, that changed it, and in my mind in a lot of different ways. What
Yeah.
are some of the things that people are saying now in terms of solutions to the climate crisis that are impractical, right? Just like how, not the
Yeah.
misinformation, but
Yeah.
ideas that are not necessarily helpful or scientific.
Yeah, there's a lot of what I call deflection, and it was
Mm.
the topic of my previous book, The New Climate War. All of the tactics that polluters and petrostates are using now to distract us, because it's sort of hard for them to continue to claim that climate change isn't happening. It's becoming, plainly obvious to most people that it is happening, and these wildfires out west are just the latest example. And so what they've done, they've sort of shifted tactics somewhat away from denying the problem exists to promoting sort of false solutions, like, oh, we just need to adapt. We just need to, and that we're hearing a lot about that right now, from the right with respect to the California wildfires. All of the supposed things that the Democratic governor should be doing or the Democratic mayor should be doing out there, mostly things that Republicans have been steadily defunding anyways. And then they turn around and say, well, why aren't you guys doing this? Why aren't you doing that? It's a form of deflection. They want to talk about anything but the underlying factor of climate change, because obviously it is inconvenient to the fact that they are in lockstep with the fossil fuel industry and their policies. Project 2025, the whole intent of that is to basically dismantle climate action in the United States and give the fossil fuel industry free rein to run amok here in the United States. And that presents a threat to global action on climate, because we are the world's largest legacy carbon polluter. And if we're not taking action ourselves, it makes it difficult to convince other nations to do the same. And so that's where we are. It's going to be a tough 4 years, because the United States is going to go from having been a leader on climate action during the past 4 years to being part of a coalition of petrostates along with Russia and Saudi Arabia that are trying to block international climate action.
Tell us more about the potential consequences of what's in Project 2025 as it relates to climate.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, if you look at it, it's just horrifying. They want to eradicate NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, because they don't want us measuring the atmosphere in the ocean and the climate. It's sort of, hear no evil, see no evil. They don't want to see anything about climate. They don't want to hear anything about climate, in the hope that somehow it'll just sort of, it'll just sort of disappear from the radar screen for the American people. And so they want to eliminate NOAA. They want to eliminate climate, basically all of the climate provisions of well, they want to get rid of the Inflation Reduction Act, which had all these provisions to incentivize renewable energy. They want to replace it now with new incentives to double down on fossil fuel energy. That's part of Project 2025. They want to basically axe the EPA or get rid of essentially all of the enforcement mechanisms within the EPA, including enforcement mechanisms to rein in polluters, and just on down the list. You can look at every single sort of governmental agency, and the Project 2025 aims to basically neuter U.S. climate action and turn over our government to the fossil fuel industry.
I feel like as we're watching these wildfires unfold, I wonder if people who weren't paying attention to Project 2025 or even climate are like, okay, maybe those folks who were talking about climate change all the time had a point.
Yeah, I hope that that's the case. Obviously, I'm out there, you're here. We're trying to do what we can to get the word out. There is a massive disinformation campaign
That's right.
to distract people so that they don't make that connection. That's the whole point of this, the finger pointing at the Democrats and claiming it's woke policies and DEI. All of that is just smoke and mirrors. It's deflection because they don't want people to focus on what's really happening here. And it's our job to try to make sure that they're not successful. Obviously, with Twitter now having been weaponized by Elon Musk to promote this sort of disinformation, that's a challenge. I would encourage your listeners, if you're on Twitter, on January 20, I'm leaving Twitter. I won't get rid of my account, and we'll still post links occasionally, but I'm going to be mostly on Blue Sky. I'm encouraging people to move to Blue Sky because that's a medium that isn't, where the rules aren't controlled by petrostates and polluters.
It's a really, really important point. I've deactivated my Twitter as well. And I think that you're right. We should not support that particular platform that is spreading misinformation. Dr. Michael Mann, director of the Penn Center for Science, Sustainability, and the Media at the University of Pennsylvania. Thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Thank you, Zerlina. It's always a pleasure to talk with you.
We're going to take a very quick break. We have a few more minutes of Mornings with Zerlina after this break.